Hey everyone, it's Ben Hardy here, and this is our off-road POV for the Wrangler 392. Now I have the sway bar disconnected. I might end up just having it fully reconnected and not have it in the disconnect mode, because once you hit 18 miles an hour, it automatically reconnects, and I just don't know how good that is for the system to constantly having to connect and disconnect every single time I go over that speed. And these trails, like this little part right here, is slow, but you know, a lot of these trails I'm going over, they're a little bit quicker than 18 miles an hour. Now this really like shows you how well this articulates, because most vehicles you get pretty tippy to the side, but in the Wrangler it's just like everything's happening within the axles. It's not happening with the vehicle, and so it's definitely an interesting style of off-roading that I honestly am not accustomed to. Yeah, I'm just gonna, yeah, see, look, it just did it again, so I'm just gonna press that. Okay, yeah, so it's just, I'm just gonna leave it connected. That means I'm gonna have a little bit of a bumpier ride, and I'm not gonna articulate as much. But again, I'd rather not put too much pressure on the system and break my brand new Jeep with only 700 miles on it. Also, this is a pretty good test because it's 91 degrees outside. And so I'm sure a lot of you watching this, you know, are probably gonna be pushing your Wrangler or Wrangler 392 in a similar, you know, climate to this from a temperature perspective. And so you'd like to know if this can handle the heat or if it's going to overheat. Now, all that bumping you guys are hearing, part of that's the trail, part of that's the Jeep. So this trail is very bumpy, but having solid front and rear axles definitely lends to pretty rough ride quality. The other thing that I'd like to mention on top of the rough ride quality is that it's just kind of makes some harsher bangs when you get full compression with the shocks. In a regular vehicle, right, you just get the compression if it has independent, you know, front suspension. But this, having solid front and rear axles, it like, that's so cool, you just climb on top of stuff. It like hits and it's just like, you feel it. And especially in the front end, it sounds like a car crash almost. It's pretty bad. But that's solid front axle life. That's the price you pay for articulation. Now, the downfall here of the Xtreme Recon package, in my personal opinion, and this is not just for the 392, this is also for the 2.0 and the V6 that you can get with this package, is not the tires, it's not the lift, it's the shocks. So in a regular Rubicon 392, you have Fox shocks, which are actually pretty solid. Xtreme Recon, you got Mopar shocks that are the same shocks that you have on the regular, they're just regular Rubicon shocks, stretched out though. And that's just not a good enough shock for a vehicle that's lifted this high. It just isn't really good with the compression, and it gives you, like on road, there's way too much body lean, and then off road here, it's not really good at absorbing things. So if you are gonna buy an Xtreme Recon, I think it's definitely worth it, but just make sure you set aside some money for some shocks. Now, the package that I really like, that I've seen on the Xtreme Recons, is AEV's package. So they've got 2-inch lift, so your vehicle would be lifted even higher than the regular Xtreme Recon, which is pretty cool. So yeah, it's a 2 or 2.5 inch lift. I might be, just check Bill Stein's website. It's like a 2 or 2.5 inch lift. And the springs they put in are a lot better than the stock ones. And then Bill Stein shocks, like I said, and then you can fit 37s underneath this. And I reviewed one, a 2.0 Xtreme Recon with that, and it drove so much better than this. Now, the reason that I haven't done that conversion yet with mine is because I want to review this several times off-road with the stock setup before I modify it, so that I can show people, hey, this is how an Xtreme Recon, yeah, you see that? This is how an Xtreme Recon performs stock. You know, actually, I think part of that's because stability control is flashing like crazy. We're just gonna turn traction control off. There we go. Okay, so we just have traction control all the way off. I think we're getting a little bit of wheel spin there, so it's making it even bumpier than it had to be. And plus, you know, when you're in 4-wheel low, it turns off the stability control anyways. Now, you guys probably have noticed that I don't have the tires aired down. The reason I'm not airing them down, which is something you obviously do with off-roading, is first off, this is supposed to be just a quick review, so I didn't feel like spending the time to air down. And secondly, I want to show you guys what this drives like at stock air pressure, right? So that you guys can see how this handles without it being aired down at all, from a ride quality perspective, and then also from a grip perspective. Now, for future reviews, I will probably air down so I get a more comfortable ride and get better grip as well. And the thing that's nice about airing down is it's kind of like an extra shock absorber almost, because there's air in the tires, and so, you know, when you compress into things, if the tire has no room to compress, then it doesn't do anything for you. But if the tire has some room to compress, then it kind of takes a little bit of pressure off the shocks, and so it lets the shocks, it puts the shocks in a situation where they can compress even more than normal, so then it just leads to a cozier ride, right? And I'm sure that, you know, long-term from a reliability perspective, it's gonna help you out because you're gonna be putting less pressure on the shocks and the suspension if you have the tires taking a little bit of a brunt of the activity. Now, I'll get back to you guys once we're down farther along the trail. Now, this is the tight section of the trail, and this is where the Wrangler frankly shines as an outdoor adventure vehicle, because you guys, if you follow this channel, you know that I just took the Raptor through this, and you know, constantly scraping against tree branches and all that, which is fine because it's wrapped. Again, that's why you wrap a vehicle. But with the Wrangler, you can pretty much avoid it altogether because this is narrow enough, and I can also kind of drive around the trail. Now, you guys probably also have noticed that I'm putting in quite a bit of effort into the steering inputs, and that's because, you know, having a solid front axle means that you don't have a lot of pressure to the wheels when you turn the steering wheel. Huge dead zone. And that is definitely, and we're actually gonna do the sway bar disconnect here. Let's see if it'll, how fast it'll be. Come on. So I gotta clear my throat a little bit. In progress, still blinking. Okay, disconnected. Now we're going over a pretty big rock here. Now we've got the ground clearance for this, no problem. And we also have the articulation. And I've got, you know, I'm narrow enough that I can avoid the other rock very easily. Now this section here is a little bit slower, so I can keep the sway bar disconnected for a little bit. But this trail is pretty similar in size to what I see in terms of most trails out there in the US. There are some that are wider, there are some that are narrower. But I feel like this is a pretty good average. And this is where something that is Jeep Wrangler size really shines, because again, you can really fit on the trail. And I've talked about this in other videos, but this is where, you know, vehicles like the Ford Raptor and Ram TRX really struggle because of the length and the width. And then the new Ford Bronco Raptor is going to struggle because of the width. And again, I'm out in the middle of the desert, and the desert is as open as it gets from a terrain perspective, but you still have areas where you've got some trees typically. I mean, depending on what kind of desert you go to. This is a higher elevation desert. And something else that's cool is the Wrangler has so much torque with this 392 powertrain that and it's got that 4.56 axle ratio. It's crazy with the Xtreme Recon package. I barely have to get into the throttle. I was actually slightly worried about, you know, off-road fuel economy range. And, you know, it's not going to be great. That's a huge bug. It's not going to be great with the 392, but it's not as bad as I thought it would be, frankly. I am going through quite a bit of range, but the thing is, I'm like not having to get in the throttle whatsoever, pretty much. Like just small inputs, because it's just so torquey. I'm almost like throughout most of this trail, I'm braking or idling through the trail on this tighter section here. And again, that's the benefit of having that aggressive axle ratio and having 470 horsepower, because you got a big V8. Now, one downside about this over the 2.0 is you will get more power loss with this than the 2.0, because the 2.0 is turbocharged. This is naturally aspirated at high elevation like I am at right now. So that is definitely something to consider if you're going to be doing, like, you know, really high elevation drives up to, like, you know, 10-15,000 feet. Then, you know, the 2.0 actually might make a little bit more sense. Now, this still is probably going to feel peppier even at that elevation, but the difference, we're going to connect that again. It's so bumpy, it's so hard to press any buttons. But the difference is not going to be nearly as much as what you see at sea level with both of the powertrains. But again, you guys can see through here, it's like idle all the way through. It's crazy. Last section for the off-road POV, and this is our hill climb with the Xtreme Recon. So you guys can see, we're at over 5,000 feet elevation here, by the way. Even at over 5,000 feet, this thing still just powers. It is an absolute mountain goat. Still have the traction control off. This thing's actually pretty fun. And again, I'm honestly not losing that much fuel range compared to most other vehicles. Like I had that Jeep Grand Cherokee 4xe out here, and this is, I mean, not as economical as that, but it's not doing too bad. Now this hill is like, I don't know, 20 something, over 20 degrees. And this is where articulation really shows through, because again, in most vehicles, I have to go into four-wheel drive low, and sometimes I have to lock the rear end to make it up that. This, we're in four-wheel high, like we're basically in the street driving mode with this, and we're able to go up. Now, something else I want to mention is, despite the solid front and rear axles and the harsh ride, I feel like I'm able to traverse this terrain a little bit quicker than most vehicles. The Raptor and the TRX are more comfortable on a trail like this in terms of like the ride comfort, but because they're so big, I lose time in maneuvering through things. I can go quicker in this. And then stuff that is smaller in size typically has independent front and rear suspension, or it has, you know, independent front suspension. And so sometimes I got to take things a little bit slower because I don't articulate as well, and so I'm worried about bottoming out. So this is pretty quick. That being said though, when I took the Toyota 4Runner through this same trail, I felt like it was pretty equal in speed. And so I am wasting this 470 horsepower a little bit. Because I you know, with that 4-liter V6 that has less than 300 horsepower, I was able to traverse this at a pretty similar speed. And that just goes to show you that horsepower, you know, yeah, I know, I understand, I turned off the stuff. Horsepower really doesn't matter all that much off-road once you are at least over, you know, 250 or 300. If you're naturally aspirated, you definitely want to be closer to the 300 range, especially at higher elevation. But yeah, I mean, this is fun. It sounds great. I mean, you guys can listen. Like, this sounds great traversing the terrain, but that being said, I'm not really gaining anything. Fuel economy though is pretty good still. I'm barely losing any fuel range. That's the thing I've noticed about some of these V8s. And now that we're up to the gate, that's gonna sum things up. But yeah, super solid. V8's fun, but yeah, I mean, in most off-road trails, it doesn't really give you any extra benefits over the Turbo 2.0. Definitely over the V6 though, because that thing's just dinky. Let me know what you guys think, but I think this is an awesome adventure vehicle. This is the sweet spot. Solid front and rear axles, and you know, 35-inch tall tires. It's just, it hits the spot.